Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first World Trade Review debate. My name is Mona Paulsen. I'm an assistant professor of law at the London School of Economics, and I am a co-editor-in-chief in the journal. Debate is a new format for the journal. Leading international economic law and policy folks across the fields of law, economics, political science, other social sciences, we want them to come in and debate current issues. Our readers will have the benefit of seeing the debate online and in print. And to complement this work, the journal will now air videos to introduce the debates. So all in service of helping our readers move the debate forward and hopefully also help lawmakers turn plans into action. Today, we get to discuss trade actions related to the climate crisis. Dr. Todd Tucker is a political scientist. He's director of governance studies at the Roosevelt Institute in Washington, D.C. Todd, hello.
Hello, glad to be with you today.
He is joined by Professor Timothy Meyer, an expert in public international law with a focus on international trade and investment from Vanderbilt University. Tim, hello.
Hey, Mona. Thanks for having us.
Together, Todd and Tim have authored a paper, a proposal, focusing on a common external tariff on carbon-intensive imports. Our reply comes from Mr. Simon Lester, founder of the international trade law website, worldtradelaw.net, one of the leading resources for trade practitioners and trade technocrats all around the world. He's also worked as a legal affairs officer at the Appellate Body Secretariat, the World Trade Organization. Simon, hello.
Hi, Mona. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me.
So, Todd and Tim, let's begin with your proposal. I take it as a baseline assumption that we all agree that climate change and environmental degradation must be government priorities. But what we don't understand is how to balance the benefits and costs of climate action and the impacts that it can have on existing international trade and foreign investment. So please tell us about your proposal that's going to be published in the World Trade Review. How does that proposal fit within existing international trade obligations, for example, made at the World Trade Organization?
Sure. Well, great. Yeah, I can take a stab. So thanks, Mona, and thanks, World Trade Review, for launching this initiative. I think it's a worthy one, and I look forward to future installments. So I want to take a moment to set a context of the week in which we're recording this video. We in the Pacific Northwest, we're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of people and animals displaced into emergency shelters in communities that are not used to over 100-degree Fahrenheit temperatures, really raising a terrific risk of wildfires. In Germany, we're mourning over 150 dead as floods decimate the continent. In Brazil, we're seeing reports out this week that the Amazon is emitting more carbon than it is absorbing, which climate scientists say it could be a tipping point for the climate, where we have fundamentally lost control of our ability to control the climate. So all of that to say is that we're in a moment of emergency in international affairs and in environmental affairs globally. So unfortunately, policymakers have dithered for far too long, and I especially include the United States, where I'm located, in that. Fortunately, however, there is indication, just even in the last week, of a substantial movement and shift in policymakers' sense of urgency. So, last week, we saw the European Union unveil its Fit for 55 agenda, which it envisions, among other things, phasing out of the free allowances that have characterized the European Union's emissions trading scheme since 2005. We've also seen the unveiling, crucially for our conversation today, of a carbon border adjustment mechanism that would be applied to steel, aluminum, fertilizer, cement, and electricity. Just hours later, it feels like, we heard in the United States that the reconciliation package, the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that Democrats are proposing, would include a clean electricity standard and a polluter import fee. We don't know exactly the details of that proposal or what sectors it would cover, but I think it's a sign of a sort of shifting sense urgency. And then over the weekend, we saw Canada come out, the Canadian Environmental Affairs Minister come out and say that if the US is going to do some type of carbon border measure, then Canada will follow suit. So we have seen, in Canada, that would accompany, the carbon tax that Canada has been using. So, so clearly a sense of urgency, which is good. But I think just even in those last few sentences that I shared, we have a sense of the policy challenge as it relates to international trade, which is that EU, US, and Canada are envisioning sort of fundamentally different ways of decarbonizing, both as it relates to their domestic economies and as it relates to their imports. And so it's in that moment that Tim and I are making our proposal, which is basically, and I'll let Tim sort of give a little bit more of the detail of the proposal, but it's, policymakers in effect and trade ministries have a choice to make. Either they can quibble with each other over the differences in the ways that they're approaching the decarbonization problem, or they can adopt sort of a common posture of a little bit more neutrality as to how countries are choosing, like the specific means by which countries are decarbonizing, but so long as countries are sort of sharing the common end of decarbonizing. So that's really the spirit in which we propose what we call our Green Steel Deal, which would be sort of the first step in allowing countries to have sort of a common and coordinated response to decarbonization of what really is one of the top industrial polluters. If current projections keep up, it looks like the steel industry will be consuming about half of the remaining carbon budget for the planet over the coming decades. So there's a special sense of urgency in focusing efforts on this highly trade exposed, highly energy intensive product that's already the subject of extensive trade controls. So that makes it a good candidate to have sort of this be the experimental phase of the first phase of a global decarbonization effort. Tim, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so I think Todd, you set the stage perfectly, and I would add just a couple of things. That the first thing is that as you highlighted, climate, the sort of merging of climate and trade policy is both happening, but it's also happening in a way that is likely to exacerbate trade tensions. If you have three different countries, and you may see other countries go down this road, Japan, if you have every country adopting its own mechanism, you're going to actually see a whole bunch of trade barriers rise among allies who ostensibly are like-minded on these climate issues, right? So the goal of what you might not really think of as almost a carbon customs union is to basically allow like-minded countries that have high climate ambition to impose a common external tariff while allowing free, essentially, trade among themselves, sort of getting rid of all of the barriers that are going to result from the EU having its own carbon border mechanism, the US and Canada. Now, one of the things when we start talking about the law, particularly as it relates to the World Trade Organization, one of the challenges has always been, is a carbon border mechanism going to be WTO compatible? And for a long time, right up until the European Union last week released its mechanism, you've seen both people in the academy as well as practitioners insisting that, if we're just technical enough, we can do this in a way that is going to be WTO consistent, might not even be discriminatory under GATT Article 3. And I think, one of the things that Todd and I have tried to emphasize is, look, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to have these mechanisms on any sort of wide scale that is going to include the United States, Canada, the EU, where they're all going to be compatible. And that's going to be even more challenging if we're trying to harmonize and actually liberalize these mechanisms to allow for freer, greener trade among these allies. And so our mechanism is designed to allow countries to essentially defend their mechanism, a common external tariff, under GATT Article 20 in the first instance, with an idea that this would be something that could pass muster, in particular under the chapeau of Article 20. I think we've seen a lot in the last week. I think Todd's right to highlight that this is moving very quickly. But one of the things that really, I think, leaps out about the EU's carbon border mechanism is it's going to be pretty tough to justify under the chapeau. And I'll just give you one reason, which is that it doesn't give any kind of credit to countries like the United States that have regulations that create an implicit price of carbon, but not an explicit price of carbon. So the EU's mechanism is only going to reward countries that have explicit carbon pricing mechanisms in the manner of the EU. That's not likely to be what the United States adopts. So this is both likely to be a source of trade tension, and I think is likely to mean the EU's mechanism is not going to be consistent with GATT Article 20. So Todd and I are trying to solve that problem and think about how we can both get the US, the EU, Canada, Japan on the same page, while also doing so in a way that more plausibly could be justified under GATT Article 20.
Thank you. So Simon, let's turn to you. So you've read their proposal. What are some of the key issues that you want to raise for this video as a part of your reply to Todd and Tim, the work they're trying to do?
Well, maybe let me just start briefly with some areas of agreement, but that's no fun, so I'll move into the areas of disagreement.
We agree as well.
Yeah. So the areas of agreement are, this is a serious problem and we need to do something about it. And that WTO law probably certainly should be accommodating for these kinds of measures. You know, a lot of this gets really technical in interpretation of GATT Article 3 and GATT Article 20. And, you know, I know, Tim and I in particular have discussed this. You know, we fundamentally, we agree on the big picture. There may be some details where, you know, we're going to quibble. So those are the nice areas of agreement. Let me talk about my areas of disagreement just in general terms. I guess I have sort of three main points here, and some of these came up in what Todd and Tim were saying when they introduced it. Some of them didn't, but I'll bring them up. So the first is how to show international leadership here. I mean, I think we all agree it would be nice if the United States were to show international leadership in this area. The history of the U.S. in this area, I think, is not good. You know, obviously there were countries like the United States who were producing a lot of carbon emissions before anyone knew what the problem was. But at a certain point, people realized that the problem of climate change. And unfortunately, there's still been a lot of dithering, as I think, as Todd said. So what do we do now? Having done all this dithering, how do we step up and show leadership? And my concern about the way Todd and Tim approach this is it feels to me a bit like an exclusive club for wealthy countries that only they can afford to join because they've already industrialized. Is sort of a carbon customs union. Everybody else is on the outside. So we're going to impose financial penalties on all these other countries. It seems to me that sort of in general terms, a better approach might be to do a bit more of acknowledging the history, of acknowledging our own problems, and then try to engage in a good faith negotiation with everybody. Take domestic actions, which Todd alluded to. Maybe that's coming from the United States. We'll see, and be willing to pay for some of the carbon emission reductions in the developing world. It seems to me we're in this moment where nobody's worrying about how we pay for anything. We're just going to borrow the money. Well, maybe it'd be worth borrowing some to help out the Indias of the world, the Bangladeshis of the world. It's going to be hard to bring them along by imposing financial penalties on them. Maybe we just pay for it. Maybe we just pay for their transition, to some extent. Okay, so that's the first one. That's my different approach to international leadership here. Interested in to hear Todd and Tim's response to my response. A second issue, and this didn't get mentioned, but I mean, I think it's a big part of what's in the article, is how the United States would respond, what particular domestic mechanism. And so Todd and Tim have advocated using Section 232, the infamous Section 232. And my concern here is that Section 232, there are actual national security threats out there that import restrictions might help with, but under the Trump administration, this mechanism, I think we would all agree, I don't know, maybe we wouldn't, but I think we would all agree, many people would agree that it was abused. And I'm just not sure that it can be, we can recover from that. I'm not sure that Section 232 can be used credibly. And if the Biden administration picks up on the Trump administration's use and says, well, we're going to use Section 232 for these other things, my sense is that other countries will think this is just the entrenchment of U.S. abuse of this mechanism. We don't want to engage if you're going to approach it that way. This is just the United States devolving into economic nationalism. And I understand that Todd and Tim will go to them and say, well, look, I know what they were doing, but we're doing it differently. We're using it for good instead. I'm not convinced that other countries will buy that. And I feel like the better approach might be, instead, this is for them to respond to. I don't know if they're saying Section 232 comes first and then we're going to do other things, but I would suggest starting with the domestic action. If you start with the domestic action, something through U.S. legislation where we pass some measure to impose some sort of carbon pricing, carbon regulation, clean energy standards, and then attached to that a border adjustment mechanism, I think that works better than saying, all right, well, we're just going to go right to Section 232 and start putting economic pressure on you. Then my third point is, I guess, ties into how you get to that domestic action, and so the domestic politics of this. Todd and Tim are make the point about how the Senate, U.S. Senate, the way it's structured, makes this difficult to get anything done. And I agree. It's just that that's the mechanism we have, and you kind of need to get a super majority in order to get anything done. And that's unfortunate, but that is where we are, and I don't think that's going to change. And so I guess the question is, well, how do you get that super majority? And they're trying to craft a coalition of various different interest groups. And I think they genuinely feel that's the most politically realistic way to approach it. I have doubts about it. I have doubts about getting the steel industry on board with this. I'm sure the steel industry would like a carbon tariff, but I'm not sure that the steel industry would like decarbonization. We'll see. I've only seen them say we'd like a carbon tariff. I have not seen the steel industry say, yes, we would like decarbonization. And I think the way to get there, and it's very hard to measure this, but it's sort of instinctive. But I think the way to get there is to do a bit of truth telling to the American people about what's needed. And so Todd tweeted out something, I think, over the weekend, quote from Senator Ron Wyden, who says, "I will make sure that no carbon policy hits working people and working families." I think if you're trying to sell to people this idea that dealing with climate change is going to benefit everybody, it's a win-win. I think that people don't really buy that, and I think there's only so far you can go with this, this idea that this is going to be some great thing where we fix the climate crisis and create jobs and get unemployment lower. I think we need to be honest with people and say there are costs, but they're worth it, because as Todd pointed out, the world's kind of on fire right now. So we're going to need to make some sacrifices. And I know politicians are reluctant to use that message, but I think that's the only way to get there. And I can't prove that. And I think that the polling that Todd and Tim point to, I think the polling is often misleading here, the way people present questions. So I can't guarantee you it'll work. I see nothing else working, and I would like to give that a try. So I'll stop there, and happy to engage with Todd and Tim's responses and all that.
Thanks so much. So for our listeners and our readers, just to clarify, to help out everybody, Section 232 is the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 in the United States. It is essentially, and Todd and Tim, I'm sure, may speak to this, legislation that allows the executive to take trade actions in the name of national security. So it is that, I think, just to add some context to what Simon was saying for his comments. So Todd and Tim, I'm sure you want to reply to some of the things that Simon raised to you. In addition, now as a final word from everyone, we really talked about this urgency with the United States and the European Union and its member states and other countries, for example, like Canada, where I'm from. So, what should policymakers begin to prioritize in these discussions? We have here Simon saying, look, the first step has to be to get the voters to have an accurate understanding of what climate action actually entails. And the flip side of that is how to then hit action quick enough, because the world, not just the United States, obviously not just Canada, not just the European Union, is on fire. And particularly with with what we've seen and exposed from the global pandemic. We're recording this in mid-July 2021. In your final responses, what should we be thinking about? What should be on the watch for? And then we're going to encourage everyone to go and see your debate in print. So Todd and Tim, I'll turn to you, and then if Simon has any last words.
Yeah, I can take a start. So I think that, I want to emphasize one of the areas of agreement, I think, with Simon, which is that trade tools are a fairly indirect and unwieldy and indirect way of addressing the climate crisis. I think that a first best policy, as I've advocated for in the past, would be for these highly concentrated sectors that are highly trade exposed. You could accomplish a lot more, a lot quicker by just nationalizing them and having the national labs figure out what are the best policies and the best techniques to decarbonize, because I think there's a lot that's unknown in terms of the economics of how to decarbonize these industrial sectors. EU in the EU, there's some demonstration projects going on right now with green hydrogen and carbon capture use and sequestration that I think are really important, but the economics of it, how it will work in practice, how firms can execute on these techniques are still not well known. So I think that, this is World Trade Review, so we're talking about sort of the trade side of it. We're emphasizing the trade side of it. But I think that, in Tim and I proposal, we are focusing as much as anything on the domestic side and sort of the complementary policies that will do most of the work towards decarbonizing the sector. And really, the trade measure is kind of an add-on just to allow a level of international coordination. But I think that it's also not the only type of international coordination. You would also need to have, tech transfer, knowledge transfer. And I think that, Simon mentioned developing countries. China and India, to be clear, are among the top emitters of carbon pollution in the steel sector, and are set to be the major emitters. So, if the US and EU and Canada and other like-minded countries can use this international coordination to get to the best technology, then I think that it would be morally and just also smart policy wise to share that technology with steel companies in China and India. So I think that that's kind of a key part of the proposal. I'll let Tim talk a little bit more on the Section 232 front, but I think that it is important to emphasize, the other side of what we've seen in the last week, right? Policy is developing really quickly, but just as soon as the EU, the European Commission announced its Fit for 55 agenda, you had what appears to be almost a majority of the EU countries say that they would not be okay with reducing the free emissions allowances, including France. So, and then in the US side, you had Joe Manchin sort of say, we're not going to do away with fossil fuels as part of this reconciliation package. And he really holds the decisive veto vote. So I think that you're seeing the politics of this are tremendously complicated. And while I agree, as director of governance studies for the Roosevelt Institute, I would love to see, sort of clean, clear policy that goes through a best process of sort of, deliberation and then getting, 60 plus senators to sign on board. I think that unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. And so I think that Section 232 might actually be a more trade liberalizing and cleaner way of doing the trade side of this decarbonization, because the U.S. executive branch can be in control of it and the State Department can weigh in, and you can have a relatively clean process that's fairly well targeted. I think that, again, we don't have a lot of details on the polluter import fee that's going through Congress, but the political scientist in me would say that if that goes through a congressional log rolling process, it might actually might be more likely to be more discriminatory than what would be produced by Section 232, because there's different industries that have to be accommodated, as to get the bill over the finish line. So I understand the international concerns with Section 232, but I think that as just a reality of politics, it may be better actually for global trading interests to have this go through an executive process rather than a legislative one. Tim.
So I agree with all of that. So I'll just say a little bit something about 232, and then I'll leave something for the readers to read about. So what I would say about that is that Section 232 is sort of misleadingly thought of as a statute that is about national security, because that's the title that it uses, and it uses those words. But it's not a statute about national security. It's a statute about economic security. And this is entirely clear if you read the entire statute, because the definition basically allows the president to impose any sort of trade restriction based on any economic harm that he deems essentially sufficiently meritorious. Now, the existence of that kind of statute, I think Simon is right, might very well be troubling to the international community. In the same way that the sort of unilateral use of Section 301 of the Trade Act by the Reagan administration in the 80s, by the Trump administration against China, might have really rankled some allies. But like Section 301, which also has a multilateral side, right? It's also the statute that the administration can use to essentially enforce compliance with WTO rulings. Section 232 has a multilateral side to it. It is a statute that gives the president the authority to enter into international agreements regulating these kinds of import restrictions with other countries. So Section 232 really does give the sort of president the authority to tackle these kinds of issues. It does not mean that the United States would be bound to defend whatever it adopted as a national security measure. And as Todd and I argue, a subsequent WTO dispute panel, I think our view is that best practice here would probably not be to challenge in the first place. That really the WTO probably should not see this as come up as a dispute if it can be avoided. But if it does, it really should be upheld under GATT Article 20 without need to resort to Article 21. The domestic statute, the road the United States takes to get there, needn't determine the international path to get there, which I think is what really worries a lot of allies. I think it's not 232. I think it's Article 21 of the GATT that really worries a lot of US allies. And look, climate change, I think, actually fits pretty squarely within the definitions of an emergency in international relations that we've seen coming out of the GATT panels, the WTO panels that have addressed GATT Article 21. But I don't think you need to get there. I think you can be upheld under Article 20, even if you rely on Section 232 as the domestic basis for the action.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I think that 21 is a danger. And I think one of the other things, and maybe Simon will talk about this, is that one of the things that has to be done simultaneously to these domestic efforts is that we need to stop talking about dealing with climate action through an exception and begin to see it as a legitimate agreement that has to be addressed within the WTO membership as well. So Simon, over to you. Last words in reply to what they have just said.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple more things about Section 232. I mean, the WTO litigation will certainly be a lot of fun to follow. I don't expect it to have much impact on any of this. Obviously, we have the appellate body crisis. Even if we had an appellate body, takes a few years to get through the process. And the WTO is not sort of a, you can't really prohibit countries. I mean, the most that would happen was there would be an adjustment. If some measure was found in violation, well, then, you adjust the balance of concessions. I don't think the WTO is going to stop anybody from acting in this area. I guess this is back to an earlier point though, but Section 232, I feel like it only deals with the international component, which is not irrelevant. Certainly it's important to have this international coordination, But the key is domestic action here. And for all the reasons that, we've all talked about, the domestic politics is tough in the United States, in Europe, and everywhere else. But that's where the action has to come. I mean, that's what we have to figure out a way to convince people. We can, negotiate between ourselves. All these countries can negotiate and sign an agreement and say, well, we're now going to take action. But that doesn't really make action happen. That doesn't make the action happen. So I feel like you really have to start with the domestic action. And in doing that, you want to coordinate with others. And I understand how difficult that all is. It's just that I think that that's the only way. I mean, that's what needs to happen. And I'm not sure how Section 232 can really prompt domestic action. I think it has to start with, how do we work within our legislatures to move things forward, and ideally coordinate with others. And finally, let me just put out a challenge to Todd and Tim, because I get their point that they genuinely think that Section 232 is flexible enough that it can be used in a good faith way to promote international cooperation here. But I would say, because I think you're both, and they can respond to this if they want, you're both on the record to some extent as supporting local content requirements in the area of climate change measures. And I feel like that kind of thing is going to make negotiating partners through a Section 232 process nervous. It's going to feel like, oh, this is just another aspect of the economic nationalism that the U.S. has been moving towards. So I would just suggest to you that in your support for this approach, maybe think about how people are going to see it when they see that elsewhere you're talking about how local content requirements would be helpful here.
So I'd quickly ask you if you do want to respond to that. If not, I'm going to wrap up, but I'll let you have that final.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mentioned sort of in the previous round that you now have sort of various EU countries, including France, and you have various senators saying that basically if climate change cost anything in their states, they're not going to take action. And I think that, local content requirements and industrial subsidies are ways to get around that problem by building political support. They may not be first best policy solutions, but I think it is a way of having communities across the US feel a tangible investment in the benefits that can come from decarbonizing. And I think that, really with the emergencies over the last few weeks that we've seen, now is not the time for sort of perfect policy. Now is the time for policy that can actually get through. And so I think that, that's certainly our Green Steel deal, I believe, is something that is doable. And I think that coupled with local content requirements, Buy American rules, and industrial subsidies could be a way of getting around the logjam.
Okay, so thanks so much to everyone. I really appreciate this. It seems like we've got big discussions ahead. It's clear that trade is a major engine of growth and development for countries around the world. We've got these big questions about politics and law, and we've also got this debate that we've been seeing for a while now about whether to use trade policy to pursue other policy goals. So please do check out our journal's website to read the entire debate as between Todd Tucker, Tim Meyer, Simon Lester. Thank you once again to all three of you for the debate. If you want to propose your own debate to us in the future, not just them, but others that are watching this, drop us a line. All of our contact information can be found on the World Trade Review website. Thank you to all three of you again, and check out their debate. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Mona.